Good afternoon, all, and welcome to today's episode on our Sustainability Survey Report 2023. My name is Sophie Hooper, and I am the Head of Policy and Research at IWFM. As per usual, I have a fabulous panel with me who will give their expert insight on sustainability in the built environment and how you can shift the dial. This report, the 17th edition, no less, built on insight gained in previous editions. And like previous editions, we're not doing research for the sake of doing research. We're trying to drive change and empower you, our members, to be the agents of change you can and should be. After all, we know that you are uniquely placed to lead on sustainability and net zero plans in particular, as you bring together the needs of the landlord, the end user, and the supply chain. There is no other role or profession so perfectly positioned to do so. And yet, while it would appear that we are not closing the intention action gap we have known about for years. It was captured in our 2021 report. So this edition tells the story of us finding out more about why so many organizations have not got plans in place, and really what the role of workplace and facilities managers currently is, and why funding isn't flooding into adapting our buildings and workplaces to make improvements that would make life better for planet, people, and yes, profit. It's obvious why we need to look at our themes of the role of FM and return on investment of funding. With buildings responsible for 40% of global carbon emissions and workplace and facilities managers managing those buildings, it's clear that we're not going to get to net zero in society if FMs are not shifting the dial on what is within their control. Our findings show that there is a clear opportunity for our profession as others shy away from the ownership and responsibility to make this happen. We'll start this session off with a poll to see if there's a difference between the audience and the report findings. My esteemed colleague Stuart will then talk more about the key findings, starting with the first theme of the role of FM. Then we will have a panel discussion with Greg and Toby and Stuart during which we hope you will be asking questions as the audience too. After that, we'll move to the second theme on return on investment, kicking off with another poll. Stuart will share the highlights of our findings once again, and we'll have another discussion with you and the panel. We'll close the session with our report recommendations and the third poll, because we want to know where you think we should look and be going next year with our sustainability research. So I would very much like to encourage you, the audience, to ask questions throughout. We will pick these up and discuss them after the presentation section. So please put the questions in the Q&A box, not the chat. And like all platforms, you will be able to ask your question anonymously if you would prefer to do so. But can we please start with introductions before going into the first poll? And Stuart, can we start with you?
Sure. Thanks, Sophie, and hi everyone. So I work on the research team here with Sophie and Kaya, and obviously very closely with the Sustainability SIG on this project. I've worked in research for the last 20 years, since I worked at Rentokil Initial, doing research and speech writing for the chief executive, and have done a variety of projects. This is one of a number of occasions that I've looked at sustainability, but I think the findings here of all the projects that I've done in sustainability stand out. So look forward to sharing them with you.
Greg, please.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name's Greg Davis. I'm Director of Market Development at Surety Consulting. As you can see, I'm also a long-standing IWFM Sustainability SIG committee member. I've been on the committee for, I think, about 12 or 13 years now, and also directly involved in the sustainability report for at least the last eight or 9 years. Background is as a microbiologist, but I've spent the last 30 years providing organisations with support on health, safety and environmental management, as well as getting involved in government consultations on behalf of the IWFM with things such as the Carbon Reduction Commitment Energy Efficiency Scheme, remember that one, and Red Tape Challenge.
Thank you, Greg. Toby, last but not least.
Thanks, Sophie. Hi, everyone. Really good to see you all here today. So I'm Toby Morgan. I chair the Sustainability SIG for IWFM, and I've been chairing for the last couple of years and taking over the great work that Greg's done as previous chair for many years. And yeah, it's really great to be involved. My day job, I work for an international NGO called Climate Group. We drive climate action fast by working with large corporates and with governments on various climate programs. I lead the work at Climate Group on built environment and energy efficiency. So yeah, my background's as an energy efficiency person. And yeah, really great to be here today and discuss some of the findings in the report. So good to be here.
Thank you, Toby. And before we let Stuart loose on the findings, can we please have the first poll up? So our first poll focuses on how would you describe the level of involvement of FM stakeholders in drawing up energy efficiency decarbonisation plans? Select the statement that best applies. Only one choice you can have. You either led the entire process, you were a key stakeholder in the process, you were an ordinary stakeholder in the process, FMs were minor stakeholders in the process, little involvement, no involvement, or you don't know. Fortunately, I can't vote, but we hope you are all voting. We need to give you a little bit of time to do so. This was one of the questions in the report that led to one of our key findings, and which brought many questions. May we please have, oh, well, that's really encouraging. Stuart, some initial thoughts?
So interesting to see the significant numbers who had fairly light involvement in the process. So 16% with little involvement, 14% with minor involvement, 18% ordinary stakeholders, and just 8% led the entire process. So I think that this group, the findings in the report are particularly relevant to you. So I suppose pay close attention to what's coming next.
Yes. Close, please. Right, Stuart, shall we give... For those who haven't yet downloaded the report, you can do so using this QR code. And then we are moving straight into Stuart's little section where he will talk more about the data. And actually, comparatively, it was quite an interesting poll result. Next slide, please. Stuart, you are in control.
Great, thanks, Sophie. So the first area to talk about is the involvement of WFMs in energy and carbon plans. And essentially what we're doing here is exploring whether they're playing the central role that we believe they should be playing. Before I dive into the findings, I just want to give you a little bit of background to the research. As Sophie mentioned, this is part of a long-running survey that we run each year around sustainability. The survey that I'll be talking to the results of was in field between August and September last year, and we had a fantastic response to that survey, 620 responses. And I'd like to give a real special thanks to those on the call who participated in the survey. Essentially, you made today's call possible with insights that you provided us with. Really robust responses from different types of individuals that work in our profession, and that allowed us to delve into some fascinating segmental differences, some of which I'll tease out today, but there's a lot more in the report. So that's the background. And if we start with that first question that you've just answered, and you'll be aware now that there are a number of different options. But for the overall results from the survey, what we found was that 2% had no involvement, 8% had little involvement, 6% had little involvement, 8% were minor stakeholders in the process, 17% were ordinary stakeholders, 52%, so the largest share were key stakeholders, and 13% led the entire process. Now, after we got the results, we had a really interesting discussion with the SIG about what we thought the minimal acceptable level of WFM involvement should be. And essentially what I'm showing here is the first of two possible ways in which you can look at the results. In this case, which is the more generous way of looking at the results, we've color-coded the bottom three as being unacceptable. So essentially applied the minimum acceptable level at ordinary stakeholders or above. And if we group the bottom three in that way, essentially what we're saying is that 1 and 6 had insufficient involvement in their organization's energy and carbon plans. I'll show you the other way in which you can look at those numbers shortly, and then we can obviously turn it over to Toby and Greg to share where the SIG landed in terms of what the recommended interpretation would be. But just the other thing to note from this slide is, like in our poll, a very small percentage actually led the process, just 13%. And again, we think that's a real missed opportunity for this sector. That number should be a lot higher. We should be stepping up in a lot greater way. So if we move to the second way of looking at the results, and essentially here we're saying that the minimal acceptable level of involvement is key stakeholders or above. So they were either key stakeholders or led the entire process. And here, what that means is that the ones in the categories in red essentially account for 1 and 3 not playing the role that they should have played in their company's energy and carbon plans. And again, we'll hand that one over to the panel to discuss shortly. The other important thing we asked in this area, in that teal color up towards the top, is in which of the following areas do you think FMs can add the most value in drawing up and actioning energy efficiency and carbon reduction plans? And very encouragingly here, and despite the disappointing levels of involvement, WFMs believe they have a lot to offer. So on average, our respondents identified 6 ways in which they could add value. And I'll quickly run through each of those because they're really important in isolation. So 76% said managing energy efficiencies and optimizing workplace use. 71% said ensuring that their building systems are properly designed, commissioned, and maintained. 69% said being involved in the decision-making around asset replacement. 65% said managing the whole life of buildings. 59% championing the importance of energy, carbon data, and overseeing its management. 50% said understanding the technology options and explaining those internally. 48% said inputting into selection and procurement of products and services. 37% said bringing together all the viewpoints and considerations. 36% involvement of higher level policy discussions around home workings, commuting, some of the strategic areas. 35% said agreeing inclusion of metrics for senior management reporting, and 27% said championing the importance of Scope 3 emissions. So very important and useful findings, and I'll hand back to Sophie now to explore those findings in more detail.
Thank you very much. And please, to all those in the audience, do ask your questions in the Q&A box. Right, to start off the discussion, Toby, I'm going to start with you. What is the minimum acceptable level of involvement for all workplace and facilities managers to have in drawing up energy efficiency and decarbonisation plans?
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. I think, what we need to do is, as Stuart was outlining, just making sure FMs are involved either as leading or a key stakeholder in all these decisions. So, with the poll, it was a kind of mixed picture, but we really want to get FMs to really lead these projects and be a key stakeholder if they're not leading them. So absolutely essential that, you know, FMs, everyone on the call here, are really involved in all those decisions. That's what we want. We know that, you know, FMs and building managers are really at the forefront. They know how their buildings are operating. They know the equipment. They know what the objectives are for the business as well. So we really need to get these people as key decision makers within all the people on the call here. So yeah, would love to see more involvement. Obviously, lots of people already are, but you know, some of the responses were saying not involved at all, or you know, involved a little bit. We really need to move that poll all the way up to the top of the chart there to say, you know, they need to be leading it or they're a key stakeholder. So that would be, you know, the call from the sustainability SIG for IWFM. We need to just be involved in much more of the decision making, and also being more proactive in, if you're not involved, then, you know, raising it, being proactive, saying I need to be involved in these types of decisions, in these types of projects.
Thank you, Toby. Greg, now I'll ask you to explain the why a little bit more, but we've had one response from Michael Kenny saying that their organisation have got an environmental sustainability manager who would lead these works with involvement of the 9 FMs and estates team. Can you talk a little bit to the why? Why is it so important for FMs to be involved to that extent?
Well, it's FM as a function within the business touches more areas that would fall under the sustainability umbrella than any other department, and therefore they have to be involved. If the organisation is going to be successful, the FM will need to be successful on that basis. For me, looking at the results, and particularly the second one Stuart highlighted, was we can see a lot of the high-end operational stuff, i.e. making sure that the worklist is optimized, making sure that it's the equipment we've got is designed, commissioned and maintained satisfactorily. We're very, very high. But then if you look at the lower end, only 36%. I mean, it's 36%, it's still a third. We're involved in higher level policy discussions around home working, commuting, procurement criteria and financial criteria. And I think it's exploring that more and getting the organisation to identify the skill sets and the input FM can have into this. As an example, particularly looking at carbon, if we take where we are with F-gases currently, we are seeing that there are numbers of organisations who are still using refrigerant gases and unaware of the fact that there are bans coming in with regards to these, and therefore what needs to be done as far as options go. And it should be the FM who's highlighting this. You can replace what you've got with either reclaimed refrigerant of a similar kind with a global warming potential above 2,500. You can replace with a lower GWP, global warming potential refrigerant, or you can actually look to replace the whole system. Now, they have 3 different impacts, and I think it's making sure that we not just from a compliance perspective, but a cost perspective and a carbon perspective, because each of those decisions the business will then make will have a different impact on carbon, on cost, and on how that organisation is going to comply going forward. The FM will have that knowledge. The rest of the business may be completely unaware of that, and that is going to be critical and fundamental to all organisations achieving their future sustainability goals, if that's a good example. Yes,
and you know, it's great that some organisations do have that sustainability role, but as you say, it's only the FM that really will know the building, really understand the decisions that need to be made against the whole life cycle, both of the building and the equipment within the building, and therefore how you need to spread that investment. So key critical. Toby, I would like to come back to you. What do you think is holding FMs back from being more involved?
Yeah, I think it can be a number of different factors. It can be, you know, just confusion internally, who's got responsibility. So having, you know, proper processes and plans in place where all the key stakeholders know who's responsible for what. So that roles and responsibilities, making sure that's really clear. If it's not clear, or even if it is clear and FM's role is not in there as much as it should be, this needs to be communicated with senior management. So making sure we've got clear line of sight throughout the organization of whose roles and responsibilities are there. And, you know, also putting forward the expertise that the FMs have. So, you know, explaining why they should be involved. You know, we've got a huge problem with corporate buildings, especially of having a big performance gap. So, you know, they should be performing at a certain level. But actually, when you look at the data, when you look at the energy usage, it's actually way above that. So, you know, FMs are in the ideal position to really help investigate that and close those performance gap issues. Like Greg was saying, it's not just a carbon issue or an energy issue, it's a competitive issue as well. You know, as much as we can do to make our buildings perform and our facilities perform as well as possible, it gives you a competitive advantage in the market. So it's really a business decision. It's not just you know, an energy decision or a carbon decision. So yeah, that would be my recommendation, to have these clear lines of sight throughout the organization, who's responsible for what, and if it's not there, then really getting across to senior management or the key stakeholders why that needs to be in place and why FMs need to lead on this work.
Greg, I'd like to come back to you, and thank you, Toby, for that. I think, you know, FMs tend to be very busy people, and therefore it may be a challenge at times to communicate things because they're juggling so many different things. But Greg, what would you say about how FMs should get more involved if they aren't already?
Well, I agree completely with what Toby said on the previous point. And I think part of it, going back to that chart we looked at as well, what our industry is fantastic in is about keeping things going and making things work. And perhaps sometimes what we need to do is take a bit of a pause and say, actually, this doesn't work. We're getting it to work. But in the longer term, if you're going to achieve your sustainability goals, our building environment goals, and the broader business goals, we need to be able to do something about this. And it's, I suppose for me, in going back a number of years now, in looking at the old BS 16001 standard, now 50001 energy management systems, and that concept of a register of opportunities, is having had a look at what equipment do we have that we are responsible for? Where are we with it currently? What are the objectives of the organisation moving forward, both from a profit and a sustainability perspective? And then what options do we have with regards to this, so that we are then informing critically the high level decisions about what the organisation wants to do? Because, you know, it's all well and good setting targets, but if the building's going to struggle to make them, it needs to change. But, you know, that's a whole business process that can't just hang on FM, but FM will be instrumental in ensuring that the organisation, one, understands it, and often two, delivers on it.
Thank you, Greg. I mean, I think you touched on something really important around, yes, the organisation might have particular objectives in place. That whole communication issue is quite key, and really trying to make the other parts of the business understand how that can be achieved through the FM function. As a consequence of that, FM needs to mirror some of the wider organisation. What do you think are the conversation topics that FMs should really be driving to highlight the climate change risks within organisations?
Is that me again?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, well, one is understanding what the business objectives are as far as sustainability goes, looking at where they impact either directly or indirectly of FM, and then starting conversations about, if, you know, what we're looking to achieve. Yes, we can achieve these. We're in scope, excuse the pun, for achieving those. But on some of the others, looking at what are you looking to do and how can we get involved in achieving this, because these are some of the issues we need to see.
Yes. Toby, do you have some thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I think just to build on what Greg was saying, just explaining, you know, when we talk about sustainability, it can touch on many different areas. So it's not just about the carbon and energy piece, which is really key, but there's lots of other touch points as well, and where FMs are ideal to be central to. So looking at health and well-being within the building, scope 3 as well. I think we'll talk a bit more about scope 3 in a later section, but yeah, there's not to think too narrowly, basically. So what are the other areas of work? I know everyone is very, very busy, as you said, Sophie, in these roles, but what are the other value adds that we can bring to this role? And we're, FMs are ideally placed to deliver on lots of those things. So I think it might, some people that are not so aware of what the role of an FM is might just have quite a narrow, they're just, looking at maintenance, carbon, energy, whatever it is, but actually it's such a wide ranging role just to get those points across. And, it's not just about keeping the business ticking over, as Greg said, it can really bring value as well. So bringing social value, bringing productivity benefits to the business. So looking at all those wider aspects as opposed to just the simple kind of energy savings, carbon saving part of it.
I think that's an excellent point. Go on, Greg.
I was just going to say, in listening to Toby there, and going back to the 2022 survey on a slightly different area where you looked at where WFM was involved. I think 76% were directly involved in their waste strategies in terms of how they were managing waste, but by the same dint, only 27% were either involved or having discussions around the circular economy. And I think that is a clear area where if that 27% was applied to the 76%, how much broader business benefit would that bring, both from a sustainability, a business operations perspective, and also in terms of the role of what the WFM is doing. So it's actually taking that to the next stage, looking at what those further opportunities are and how can we apply them.
Yes, and that whole application piece, I guess there is still an awareness raising role to do upwards, to really link to what FMs are doing with those wider strategic goals that can't be achieved without the FM. Like ESG, we know that there is probably going to come some mandatory reporting in line with that. That is important for investment to get into the business, which leads on to our next subject. But if FMs really can link that to those wider business objectives in the language and reflecting that business language, that should create the greater space for them to operate within there, within that arena as well. Right, I think this was a really good discussion. Time is moving very fast, so I think we probably need to move to our next poll, please. Thank you. In your organisation, how would you describe the investment return requirements for projects relating to energy efficiency, decarbonisation, net zero, where relevant? Select the statement that best applies. Projects need to exceed the normal return on investment criteria. They need to meet the normal investment criteria. The ROI criteria is below normal, but above break even. It is break even. It is less than break even. Or some people don't look at ROI for these types of investments, or you don't know. Now, I noted some more questions from the previous session in the Q&A box. We will get to these and we'll bring them over to the next panel. Do we get to see the result, please? Should have given everyone sufficient time. Wow, interesting. Hope everyone has had an opportunity to see that with either exceeding the normal ROI criteria or meeting the normal ROI criteria is a whopping 53%, which kind of reflects the trends, if not slightly more severe, that we picked up in our survey. Stuart, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Sophie. If we can just go to the next slide. So the second area that we looked at was the investment processes within an organization. And as Sophie said, we were interested in understanding why the flood of money that should be going into new equipment and investment is just a trickle. And we started by asking this question here around funding. So when it comes to investments relating to energy efficiency and carbon reduction, how is the funding for this currently allocated within client-side organizations? Number of options here. So 22% you can see do it automatically from budgets. Another 11% do it automatically following depreciation and amortization of existing equipments. 30% said they had special one-off budgets for energy or decarbonization. That's a significant finding and one that we'll touch on later, but do take note of that. And then the largest category, 53%, assessed the projects individually on their investment merits. And essentially to that group there, the 53%, we then asked the follow-on question, which you've just answered in the polls. If it's relevant to your particular organization, obviously you may fall into one of the other categories. And if we can move forward and share those results. So as Sophie says, this group here came out at 53%. What we found in our survey was 43% either expected these projects to meet or exceed normal ROI criteria. Interestingly, that number is higher in the private sector. So in the private sector, that group accounts for 46%, in the public sector, just 37%. But frankly, if you want to put your finger on the bottleneck in one number, that's the number. A really quite astonishing finding from the survey, and one that we should really be taking note of and trumpeting far and wide. I'll skip through some of the other options here, other than just to say, interesting to see that 23% don't look at ROI for these types of investments, which may well speak to the limitations of the investment process that we'll be flagging up shortly. Also, and quite concerningly, 18% didn't know, which isn't great. WFMs need to understand how the investment process works and what criteria are applied. If we move forward, so essentially to try and forge a way out of the current deadlock around investments, we then asked this question here. So again, in teal, in what ways, if any, would you like the investment process around energy efficiency, carbon reduction in your organization to be changed? And before we delve into the individual details, do please take note of two things. First of all, the number of changes required. Typically, respondents were identifying 4 changes that they thought should be made. The other thing to note is that broadly speaking, WFMs want to improve the existing process rather than scrap it entirely, which is again an important finding in its own right. But if we quickly run through the individual suggestions as to how they think the investment process should be changed. So 52% said FMs need to improve how they capture the data. 47% said that they should look at the benefits of doing projects together or concurrently. 47% said they should factor in wider benefits relating to employees, productivity, and reputation. 41% said investment upgrades should be timed around the building life cycle. Again, 41% said finance teams should have a better understanding of the nature of these investments and how to account for them. 38% said they should account for the benefits of sensors or preventative maintenance. 34% said they should factor in the price and cost of carbon into the calculations. 27% said it should be accepted that many of these investments will make negative returns. 25% said they should create or continue with a special one-off budget for energy decarbonisation, which again is another point that links to the earlier one. And 12% said ROI criteria should be relaxed or scrapped. On the right-hand side of this chart, I have just tried to categorize the broad categories into which those different suggestions fall. And if we flick to the next slide, we can see the relative importance of or frequency of those categories. And right above, towering above all other categories, is the improved investment process point. And then a long way further down, the suggestion that to scrap change measures, as well as other actions, including create special budgets, look at the timing, improve the data, and improve the wider understanding. So again, some really important findings around this bottleneck and how to get around the bottleneck when it comes to investments. And Sophie, again, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you, Stuart, for that. Very, very useful. Obviously, investing processes and unlocking funding is proving to be a little bit of a barrier. And there seem to be quite a bit of myths out there around what is achievable, even with small pots of money or big pots of money. I was at a conference yesterday, and a lot of talk was still around how much it is possible to achieve within existing budgets and within existing equipment, etc., by just taking some particular actions. But at the same time, I think the elephant in the room very much was that if you need to do some overhaul of equipment, etc., you are going to need that investment, and we're not going to get to net zero without really shifting the funding and unlocking that investment. So what I'd like to know from either of you, feel free to go first, either of you. What return expectations are appropriate when it comes to investments relating to energy efficiency and decarbonisations? Help us bust the myth, please.
Greg, do you want to go, or shall I go? Oh, you're on mute, so I'll take that as I should go. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting area, Sophie and Stuart, and something we wanted to look into this year specifically. In the course of my day job, it's often cited as the number one barrier, normally the upfront capital costs. So how can we explore, some innovative funding models to try and get around this? And really interesting to get that sort of industry insight from members saying, looking at the current funding models, current ROI models are what is most common. So, when we go to do deep carbon retrofits of buildings, it's not going to hit, the 5-year return on investment. It's going to be a really long-term investment that is required. So how can we get around those upfront cost barriers? There's been some interesting models. ESCOs have been around for a number of years. So energy service companies that can help get that finance off the balance sheet and look at some more alternative funding models. Also service-led models, so things like energy efficiency as a service or decarbonisation as a service. A lot of companies are looking into that as well. Again, you're paying for that service and not the individual bits of kit, so that helps the upfront cost factor as well. Also, I think we start needing to explain to senior management and the budget holders, these simple return on investment calculations are just not fit for the level of the challenge that we're facing with this. So trying to explain those additional benefits, you're future-proofing your company, you're making yourself more resilient, you're going to be hopefully a market leader if you do this work. So looking at all those additional benefits, not just the simple, return on investment. If we upgrade our HVAC system, it's going to cost this much, it's going to save this much money, therefore the payback is. We need to look at a much bigger picture of this. Yeah, I think there's lots of work still needed, and FMs can really help feed into that process. And just saying some of these longer payback systems and bits of kit and work is not going to be making the the standard return on investment calculation, seem like an adequate measure, basically.
Okay, thank you. Just thinking about the ways in which it needs to be improved, the investment process. How important do you think is the point around being better at capturing data?
Oh, it's vital. You need to be a source of reliable information. And again, echoing exactly what Toby said with regards to ROI, and I think where we are, we're at a critical phase, because going back to the 2015, 2016 report, we saw, as far as the effectiveness of the implementation of sustainability measures in organizations, took a 20% drop in that single year. And looking at the analysis of the information we got back, it appeared that the most obvious reason for that is a lot of the low-hanging fruit, the things that were low cost and did have a positive impact, they've been done. And that's not to say that all organizations are in the same place, but now it is investing, and we need to look at from that chart, and the ideas we've got is a huge manifesto for how we should be looking at what we're delivering going forward, and what the ROI is. And is it a financial ROI? Is it business benefit ROI? Is it a carbon ROI? And looking at them all. I mean, using the F-gas, there are obviously huge areas of sustainability, other areas to be covered, but using that, and with the compliance cost model that I mentioned earlier, and carbon into that, the organization if you were to just reclaim using the existing systems, that would have a low cost, but would have a high carbon impact, because you're looking at refrigerant gases with global warming potentials of 2,500 plus. So that would be the most cost effective on ROI. In the short term, as we get closer to 2030, how much the cost of replacing those would need to be factored into that. The using existing equipment but new refrigerant gases would have a higher cost, but would reduce the carbon burden. But you're also then looking at the whole of life of that particular bit of kit. The third one, in replacing everything, you've got vastly improved kit, you've got better carbon, but it's going to be a high cost, and it's allowing the business to make those decisions and saying, these are the options we've got. This is how we need to look at it. Our ROI from a carbon perspective in this, from a compliance perspective in this, from a cost perspective in this. What decision do you want to make, bearing in mind that you're setting our goals as far as sustainability and carbon management goes?
Yeah. And just to build on that a bit further, Sophie, yeah, agree with what Greg said there. And also we're seeing some organizations looking at multi-year funding models and things like that. So you might, have a fixed budget for 1 year, but if you package those up into a multi-year project, that can really help offset, the lower payback, quicker payback items can help offset the longer payback items. So looking at your own internal budgets as well, and looking at different ways you can work that can really help. So it's not necessarily additional money overall, but it's just how you figure that out internally. So looking at multi-stage, multi-year packages and things like that.
Cool. Just to kind of get back around why we need to make these changes, because obviously this is a big barrier, but how serious a bottleneck do you think these unrealistic return expectations are in terms of making progress on energy efficiency and carbon reduction?
Significant.
You may have already touched on some of this, because lots of the low-hanging fruit has already been done. We've got a question from the audience before coming back to some other bit, because, and I think this is the challenge that many in the audience will have with, in addition to putting it in a demeaning way that FMs are very busy. There is the acknowledgement that they are ideally placed, but FMs already have too many elements to their role, including sustainability, HR, health and safety, PLL, engineering, cleaning, security, etc., and hence too much responsibility, especially for their salary. And that's a really good question. Who would like to take up that challenge? How to navigate that?
would agree, and it's not easy. It is about balance, but how much of the organisation recognises that? And it just really echoes the criticality of FM, because with regards to all of those elements, if they're not being fully optimized, the business is losing out, and that's either from a profit perspective, an operation perspective, or a people perspective. It is about a balance, and it's not easy. It's the same, with looking at, you add scope 3 in to the carbon agenda. Scope 3 isn't easy, which is why the SIG has been looking at this for the last couple of years in terms of what should that look like in FM and how can we help. But it is factoring that in, it's getting the business to recognize that, and it's getting the business to put the support in where it's needed, because that is another investment, and the ROI on that would be excellent.
Yeah.
Hold on to the scope 3 bit. Yes, Toby?
Yeah, absolutely. Just, echo what Greg says there. I think organizations need to properly resource all of this work. Like Greg said, it's an investment. It's not a cost. But yeah, absolutely. FMs have got so much on their plate that the senior management need to ensure that it is properly resourced, because it touches on so many different areas which are positive for the business. It shouldn't be seen as a drag on the business.
I think this links kind of with the next question that we have from a TP Thomas around FM's role is getting more important with organisations that need to comply with ESG reporting standards and should take opportunity to ensure buildings are sustainable and carbon emissions. What's the panel's view on this?
Yeah, agree completely. It's having that ability to provide information back into the business that's reliable, verifiable, and accurate. But it is across, going back to the previous questions, it is across a number of areas. So it's being able in the first instance to identify those key criteria and providing that information back into the business, and then looking to expand on that, because once the business recognizes there is a whole host of really, really good information about our business for the internal as well as the external customer, then we're back into why wouldn't you invest more in that, and why wouldn't you support those processes, and why wouldn't you help them make them more robust?
No, that's quite right. Thank you for that. And I think while we first will see that shift in larger organizations where that reporting is mandatory to stay competitive, and that goes back to your answer, Toby, earlier, to be competitive, to be seen competitive, but also to attract people that want to work with you in your business, that will need to cascade down, because the expectation will be that that information is becoming much more transparently available, not just internally, but externally. I've got another question here from Steve Burr. As an architect, FMs have been key members of the client briefing teams for 3 of the low carbon buildings we have designed. Should there be closer collaborations with other professions? Who would like to take that one?
I think absolutely, yeah, because the built environment, there is just multiple stakeholders involved in that, and if they're just working in silos, then like I was saying, you're going to have this big performance gap issue. So absolutely, I would encourage all of the stakeholders to work together. I know everyone's very busy in their day job normally, but it's really valuable. That's what we try and do with Climate Group's work as well, is provide that peer-to-peer learning. So you're meeting other companies, seeing how they're doing things, talking about issues, how we got over barriers, how we finance projects as well. But yeah, I think it's absolutely vital. And, you might have we've seen it in the past, you might have a nice shiny new building that's supposed to be efficient and sustainable, but it's actually performing not very well at all. So yeah, completely vital that everyone within the network is talking to each other.
Yeah, definitely. I see parallels here with what's happened with fire and the concept of golden thread, so that you've got key information flowing through with responsibilities identified. So what you're actually getting is what it was designed to do and how it was built to deliver on those. And then from an operational perspective, because it's great that question came from an architect as well, but you know, from the design, construct, operate model, it's operating for an awful lot longer than the design and construction phase, and it needs to be weighted on that basis because of that fact.
Thank you, thank you. And where you were going, Greg, I was going as well, with kind of thinking around the information flow, around the asset management piece, and making sure that you closely collaborate and your teams within asset management actually understand what the purpose is of collecting the information. That it is not just for the sake of keeping it here, but to make longer term investment decisions, full life decisions. But likewise with HR, you know, one of the audience indicated the wide range that FM is covering, and I don't need to tell the audience that they're living the job day to day, but where decisions are being taken around well-being, inevitably they can't be contrary to what the building can deliver on or not deliver on, and they might be contradicting on some of the objectives that the organization wants to achieve in terms of reducing carbon emissions, but at the same time you want to ensure that healthy airflow as well. Just had a pandemic, and likewise technology and the data teams, that they all know around the digitization, but what the purpose really is of having the information, so those organizational decisions really flow. I'm afraid we're not necessarily making FM jobs easier. It just goes to show that they are really central to enabling any other part of business. But there's another quick question as well. Is there a ratio for the number of FM staff against the number of employees? Interesting.
What a great question. No, I don't think there is. Certainly, I've not come across one. What you will tend to find, regardless of what the ratio is, the FM will always look to deliver on whatever the needs are. And I think, you know, I go back to my earlier point. Sometimes, particularly with regards to the building, if it's not going to work, you do need to call it out. You know, the long seen as being able to provide excellent problem solving and will come up with a solution. That in a lot of these instances, and certainly where you're looking at investment going forward, there may not be an obvious or easy solution, but it's a matter of recognizing that and actually saying.
Thank you. I would like to go back to scope 3 for one moment, because Greg, you touched on it, how within the SIG we have really been trying to pin down how FMs can make a difference. From an IWFM perspective, we have supported quite an impactful piece of research by the SFMI on scope 3, collaborating with a vast range of service providers across BRICS and IEMA as well, to really understand the role of FM within that scope 3 piece. But what this research seemed to indicate is that scope 3 wasn't necessarily high on the area where FMs could add value. It was the lowest one on the added value list that we had. And then when it came to kind of looking at plans, only 5% of respondents selected the option it doesn't cover any of scope 3, which we would anticipate to see as much higher. What do we really feel about the role of scope, well, of FM around scope 3?
I think there's two elements to this. There's one, organizations getting to grips with actually what scope 3 emissions are. And then is recognizing that for an awful lot of them, they are going to fall into the domain of the FM. And this comes back to the point made earlier where you were talking about ESG. Non-financial risk management is not going to go away. It's going to become more important from a business reputation perspective to the ability of attracting investment. And as we understand that, it's one of the things the SIG is looking at doing is providing that information to say, well, actually, this is what scope 3 actually entails, and it's not a matter of picking and choosing. If you're going on a net zero journey, then it's a net zero journey. You can't pick the bits you want to do and ignore the bits you can't. You've got to look at your scope 3 emissions in its entirety and come up with a plan for how you go into what your journey looks like and how you're going to get there. And what we will find, again, apologies for the earlier question as well, so we've already got a lot on our plate. Scope 3 emissions is going to put a lot more on the FM plate as far as managing those and managing proactively.
Brilliant.
Yeah, just to add on what Greg said, Sophie, I think, yeah, it's a huge topic. I think this is where the SIG and IWFM can really help work with members on this, because, you know, no one exactly knows what it is. It can take you down so many different routes, and most people might have a vague idea of what Scope 3, but how does it actually relate to their day-to-day, and what their job entails. So I think, yeah, we need to play a big role in helping raise awareness with members. And as Greg said, it's not an issue that's going to go away. You know, lots of companies have made really good strides on their Scope 1 and 2, but Scope 3 is sort of a whole different kettle of fish. So we're going to need to really help members get up to speed on what this involves, but also explain what the benefits of doing this. How can we work together to tackle this, and also larger organizations working with SMEs, because, you know, SMEs might not have the resource to be able to work on this. So how can we, you know, work with the supply chain to help raise their skills and knowledge and awareness as well?
Thank you both for that. Before we go back to, well, not back, but before we go to the third poll, could we please have the slides back up again so we can talk through the recommendations and takeaways of both areas? Stuart, can I give the floor to you to briefly talk about what the report also does in addition to analysis?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sophie. So just importantly, there are recommendations in the report for WFMs for leaders of all organizations, because this obviously is a message that we want to get to the very top of organizations and ourselves. Here are the key recommendations for WFMs. So for starters, we suggest do a risk assessment around your current energy usage and carbon emissions and look at the various options going forward, or prepare a decarbonisation transition plan for your organization. Very importantly, if you aren't already taking a lead in the planning and execution, be assertive and put yourself forward. Look at areas where other WFMs think the profession can add value and challenge yourself to do more. Are you doing the various things that have been identified? Build up your knowledge and expertise, read what's available on our website and other industry leading groups, sign up to our training courses and join Toby and Greg in the SIG and get involved in the discussion. We'd specifically recommend the IWFM's Net Zero Toolkit. That's a great resource for you to use. Familiarize yourself with the way that your investment process works, very important, and learn how best to work within the system that you have. And then if we go to the next page, there's some more specific suggestions here. So advocate for the revamping of your investment process, be better at the capturing of energy use data, allow for doing projects concurrently, factor in the wider benefits relating to employees' productivity and reputation. That will help to balance out the numbers. Time your investment upgrades around building life cycles, and just have in mind the investment shortcuts that we list in the report. Toby's already talked to the alternative funding model, but creating a special budget to get funds flowing is another useful option, as is relaxing or scrapping return on criteria to unlock funds if that's possible. And as already mentioned, don't ignore Scope 3. So those are the key recommendations from the report.
Thank you, Stuart. And the audience will be delighted to know that we're not just putting the onus on you, but there is a real onus on us, IWFM, as well, to be the catalyst in making positive change. And we need to do that through a variety of ways. First, we need to be advocacy for you, for our members, for the profession, in really outlining what the role is and where other organisations have a responsibility to really support the role as well in delivering against what it can deliver. We also, in the near future, have got a publication coming that supports our members with energy management, and that will be a good practice guidance that will be published very, very near future. And we will, or I should say the Sustainability SIG has got a program of activity in design that will help support our members more in the areas that the survey has indicated, including how to optimize the investment processes, how to overcome obstacles with landlords around energy and carbon, but also how to collaborate towards lasting solutions, including on things like investment. And one of the areas of work that we're also doing is looking at the skill set that is needed for this area so that we can equip our members in the best possible way to achieve all the goodness that can be achieved. So that's really where we have got a lot of work ourselves as well. Could we please have the last poll? Because while we've just published the last survey of 2023, the Sustainability SIG doesn't sit still, and we're already collaborating to start thinking about where we need to go next. So for the 2024 edition, which topics would you be most interested in us exploring? Please let us know if the answer isn't on the page, and please, there are more options than are visible in a single glance, so you do need to scroll down. But if you've got any further ideas, let us know on research@iwfm.org.uk, and for the rest, please, it would be really good for us to know what your problems are. We obviously come together in the Sustainability SIG to discuss what we're seeing, but it would be good to get your thoughts as well. And we will be discussing the feedback from this in the next Sustainability SIG meeting. And we'll let you know by a news item. Right, thank you. So that really brings me to thanking everyone. Thank you all for making the survey a robust piece of research, given the number of participants that we've had. We aim to do better, but we can only do that with your participation. So thank you all. And then the next thanks goes to our great panel and Stuart, Toby, Greg. Thank you very much. You, the audience, for staying tuned in for so long, and to our recording will be available for anyone who wants to listen again or share with a friend. And thank you as well to our webinar support team, Lucy and Kaya, for your support with the polls and slides today. I really hope that we have provided some food for thought, and more so an incentive to transform intent into action. Action to get a seat at the table and add value you know you can add already. Action to take the lead on your organization's net zero plans and have started to get ideas on how to unlock the funding for the investment you require but are currently not getting. So our report provides all of those recommendations and more. We've got further reading in there. We've got signposting to other pieces of guidance in there. So please go and explore it. Ask us any questions you want to via the research@iwfm.org.uk email address. And please keep on visiting our website as well to see the progress that we're making around the support for you. Thank you for joining us today. Until next time. Thank you.